Support for Cinema Classics comes from Film Columbus, enriching our community to make Columbus a destination for film education, exhibition, and production. Learn more at filmcolumbus.com. Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Listen to shows every Thursday at 8:01 p.m. and full shows online at WCBE.org. I'm John DeSando.
I'm Johnny DiLoretto.
This is Cinema Classics.
Of course it is.
Yes, it is. You know, one of your favorite topics is superheroes. And I've learned a lot from you about that. So I came across an article, of course, where do you think?
That makes me sound like such an immature idiot.
You think so?
I think it seems a little childish, don't you?
Isn't
it time to put away childish things?
No, I don't think so. I think that's part of your charm.
Mm.
You have a childlike enthusiasm for things. Mm-hmm. But I do too.
Okay, yeah.
So that
well, good.
Yeah, this makes a very fine, immature show.
Right.
But anyway, the evolution of superheroes.
Yeah.
And I contend we start with the Adventures of Superman in 52 and 58. You think?
No.
No, you want to go way back to Flash Gordon or whatever?
Well, no. Even going back to Superman, you have to go back to the original comic and those early Max Fleischer cartoons, which I think were really the key to sort of sparking the wider audience's imagination. Have you ever seen those Max Fleischer cartoons?
I'm not sure I have.
Oh my God, they're gorgeous.
All right.
Are we
Yeah.
good over there?
I think so, yeah. I'm just looking. Yeah, we're good.
So, you know, Superman was invented in the early 30s, comic book figure. And then, you know, the guy who made all those Popeye cartoons, which I think you could look at Popeye in some ways as a superhero, too.
Oh, very good, yeah.
You know, Popeye's this guy, he's running around and he's just kind of suffering quietly, you know. And then when he needs to, he takes this little dose of spinach and it turns into a superhero.
Well done, well
right,
done.
and then so Fleischer, they made these Superman cartoons, and the animation is really gorgeous. And I think that's probably the first time that something, you know, comic books were for kids, right?
Yeah.
So now when an audience sees that, it really just fires the imagination. So I think that's key. Also, when you talk about evolution of superheroes, there's just two things I think you really have to think about. The evolution of special effects and the ability to realize convincingly, visually, these powers, how they're manifest. And then two, the constant growing, the constant exposure to new generations, right?
Sure.
So at this point in time, it feels like we take superheroes more seriously than we ever have before. And that's because I think people like me, who watched the Batman show, and, you know, my dad would watch that and laugh.
Yeah.
I would watch that and
did you
I
really?
was very serious about it.
And don't you think that that in the course of any particular genre, that this is appropriate, that you bring in that element of humor?
Mm-hmm.
That is, the richness of this
Right.
allows it to have that humor, and even our current ones, where you were quite right, very serious, but at the same time, one of the hallmarks of the newer superhero films is that these toss-off lines, these quips, which I look for and enjoy. So humor, to me, is a part of the spinach that they're all eating.
Yeah, that's true. And because it can appeal with that to both, right, an older demographic and the younger demographic. The other thing I want to say that I think explains the long success of this and the burgeoning success of this is that the superhero genre can coexist in many different forms, right? It exists in comic book form. It exists in animated television form. It exists in animated theatrical form, and it exists in live-action TV and theatrical form.
Yeah.
So it's got all these tendrils, and it's the premises and the visuals can be realized in so many different ways. You're not going to get, a James Brooks Terms of Endearment cartoon,
No, right. And you know something, um, I always thought that the superhero business was as much about what we wanted to be
Mm-hmm.
and probably couldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the time when they were always like that, the Superman TV show, always straight up guy.
Right.
You know, when you get much later on, they're flawed. Our
Mhm.
superheroes are flawed just the way we are.
Yeah.
But initially, I thought it was very much like Homer in the
Yeah.
Odyssey and so on. We had larger than life people and people, let's say heroes like Odysseus, who were better than we were and so much smarter than we were in so many ways, but just as flawed as we were. And I think particularly about women, for instance,
Yeah.
and the sirens. You know, he had to lash himself to the goddamn mast
Right.
to get off that boat
Yeah.
and go there. But anyway, yes. So the richness that you're talking about seems to me to evolve. Now, in the '60s, the '50s and '60s were so important for this. In the '60s, my favorite was Barbarella.
Oh yeah. Right. Interesting. You know, I've never seen that. She's a superhero in that.
Yes, well, she's a kick butt, and she is Jane Fonda, just in her best possibilities.
Well, I'm glad you brought the '50s up because, you know,
But I really, yeah, right, the 50, because we're Barbarella '68.
right.
Yeah.
But in the '50s, so you have the comic book craze. Excuse me. So in the '50s, you have the comic book craze kind of dying down, right? And by that point, you have Batman, Superman, you have Captain America.
Yes.
By that point, this genre has erupted in the comic book world. But Batman his popularity started to wane. And so, Bruce Wayne, haha. And so they invented the character of Robin. That also, I think, is a key evolutionary moment.
Huh.
Because Robin was the stand-in for all those younger kids who couldn't,
Wonderful.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then, of course, that unleashes the whole, like, is Batman gay subtext
Sure.
questions?
Yes.
And what is the nature of this relationship?
And you know, I think it carried on, helped to carry on the spirit, the American spirit of truth, justice, and the American way.
Yeah.
You know, that way, which is, it seems corny now, but at that time I think it was very important that we hold on to that tradition from the war. And your superhero stuff does that.
And by the way, that's one of, you know, when I take this seriously. I love these superhero movies.
Yes.
I particularly love, as I've said before, the original Christopher Reeve 1978 Superman, the movie.
Yeah.
And one of the most beautiful scenes
Uh-huh.
is the scene where Lois interviews him.
Okay.
She has the exclusive rooftop interview with Superman, and they have this nice sort of flirtatious banter. And she asks him, "Why are you here?" And he says, "I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way." And she laughs, and he does not. And he says, "Lois, I never lie." And I've always wanted to be that. That was one of the key moments I saw as a kid. I so admired that. And when I think of truth, justice, and the American way, I think of him, and that representation.
And nobody could beat Reeves, I think,
Mm.
as Superman.
No, he just, like, it was one of those perfect, happy
Oh.
accidents, a perfect storm,
Oh,
right, of this
yeah.
young guy, you know, and he wasn't. Now they'd cast a 20, 30-year-old. I think he was probably a little older, but
Yeah.
perfect in that role. Anyway.
What about Wonder Woman? And then this is the '70s.
See,
now.
this is great because Wonder Woman, I watched Wonder Woman. I couldn't get enough of these superheroes. Shazam was on when I was a kid. Isis, there was this show, live action show called Isis about the Greek goddess. There was this school teacher. She turned into this goddess, Egyptian goddess rather. Wonder Woman, Spider-Man. There was a brief Oh, and of course, how can you forget the Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno, Incredible Hulk television
Oh, good
show.
for you, yeah.
So when we think about, there's so many superhero movies now. I mean, I was gobbling this stuff up 30 years ago.
Would you agree that in 1989, for me, the apotheosis of all of this came in Dark Knight?
Oh, you mean Batman?
Yeah.
The Tim Burton's Batman?
Yes.
It did, and there was a lot of things that happened with that. One, it was this notion of, we're going to envision this in a more serious way.
Yeah.
We're going to take it a little more seriously. The darkness of the production design and the visuals, more so than anything. That movie is incredibly flawed. It's not a great movie. It has a great production design
It
and
does.
some great music
Yeah.
and some great iconography, but as a film, it's a really kind of stop and start, slow to get going. It's not a great movie
Right.
in and of itself. But that I think that is also key. You're right in the evolution that like, hey, look, we can make these look amazing, and we can take them seriously. And I think without that movie, you don't have Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy.
And I think that's where you're going. Yeah, yeah, that's a beauty. But I remember Jack Nicholson also
Mhm.
as the Joker.
Yeah.
Unforgettable.
Right.
You know, you talk about a character made for an actor.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right, and that's part of the problem because I think his performance was so hypnotic to Tim Burton that Tim Burton
Yes.
starts giving him all these scenes, and before you know it, the movie is just sort of out of balance.
Another 10 years, and I think this gets very sophisticated in some way with The Matrix. And I know it's difficult to think of the Keanu Reeves character as a hero.
I don't. I think
Yeah.
he is a superhero.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, so,
That is clearly a superhero. Too.
all right, good, yeah. And that's to me a complicated, challenging
Mm-hmm.
a piece, don't you think? Can you see an evolution
Yeah.
coming to that where we can actually look at, accept, and make that iconic?
Yeah, and I think the key lesson there is that every once in a while, and it's very rare, you can invent a new superhero. That's what happens with The Matrix,
Yes.
right? Is Neo is a new superhero. One more thing, you know, westerns, right? These
Yes.
are the new westerns,
Yes.
kind of, aren't they? And you remember how westerns were always about the hero, the one guy, right? So by the 1960s, that one guy thing was kind of played out, right? So they started to do the team western,
Right.
like the Professionals,
Yes, yes.
and
the Wild
Magnificent
Bunch.
Seven, and the Wild Bunch, right?
Yeah.
That was one way to vary the genre, right? And that's where we are right now with superheroes. The Avengers, Justice
Yes.
League. We're starting to see these larger stories, these larger teams.
And
right?
I think we've even connected it to families. I think in one of our previous shows,
Yeah,
that a lot of that, and I always think that The Incredibles represents a certain level.
of course.
You know,
Yeah.
Cartoon characters,
Mm-hmm.
heroic,
Mm-hmm.
related to family.
Right.
We've come a long way, baby, in that. And I think two of the new ones represent a very sophisticated form of this. One would be the new Wonder Woman,
Mm-hmm.
and the other would be the new, the Black Panther.
Right. And I think that's the key. That's where we end up, right? With
Yes.
the evolution of the superheroes, you're going to see more diverse representation.
Yes, yes.
And who knows what we'll see.
Hey, I know. Do you think there's any end to this?
No, it just keeps going. I don't know. I guess it just like it has to be something like the Western, right? Where the genre, look, they still make Westerns.
I know Kevin Costner.
So
still
we're like
loves
100, the Western is over 100 years old,
it. I know.
right? So the superhero genre I see going just as long, maybe morphing into something else.